The room was silent, except for the faint hum of an oxygen machine in the corner and the nervous tapping of a cane against the floor. A group of men and women, each marked by years of service, sat side by side in their wheelchairs and worn chairs, facing the same makeshift stage. Their eyes weren't on medals or ranks anymore. They were on their art. Small canvases painted with colors that screamed, cried, and whispered stories that words never could. And then, through the double doors, walked the man they had waited weeks to see. Prince Harry, the face of Invictus, the supposed champion of veterans, the man who'd built an empire on empathy. Cameras followed. Smiles erupted. But none of them knew that within minutes, that very man would laugh. And that laugh would pierce deeper than any bullet ever had. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What kind of prince laughs at a soldier's pain? It's the question that echoed across the walls of Toronto's Veterans Care Center on that cold autumn afternoon. The question that now fuels outrage from every corner of the veteran community. Because what happened that day wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a moment that exposed something raw, something cruel, and something no PR team can bury anymore. They called it a moment of light humor. But to the men and women in that room, it was something else entirely, a betrayal. It started as a day of pride. The center's art therapy group had been selected to showcase their work to the visiting Duke. For months, they'd poured their hearts onto canvases, abstract colors, distorted figures, chaotic brushstrokes. Each piece an echo of a memory they wished they could forget. Some had painted explosions. Others, empty beds. One canvas simply showed a set of hands, shaking under a sky of black rain. To them, art was medicine. And today, that medicine would be shared with a prince who supposedly understood their pain. After all, wasn't Harry the veteran prince? The soldier who'd served in Afghanistan? The man who claimed to have seen the horrors of war? They believed he would get it. They believed he would honor it. But what happened next would haunt them all. A decorated veteran named Lucas, known around the center for his calm strength, rolled his wheelchair forward as his turn came. On his lap sat his painting, an abstract explosion of red and gray. The piece didn't have a name, but everyone in the room knew what it was about. PTSD, the invisible wound. Lucas had spent months painting that canvas during long therapy sessions. He said it helped him sleep, helped him breathe. He'd told his therapist that one day, he wanted someone important to see it, someone who could make others understand that PTSD isn't weakness, it's survival. That day had come. He looked up at the prince. "This one's about what happens after the uniform comes off," he said softly. "It's what the nights feel like." Harry leaned in, glanced at the chaotic brushwork, and then, with a half smile, said something that froze every breath in the room. "Well," he chuckled, "that's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" For a second, no one moved. Not even the cameras. The laughter echoed like static. Lucas blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Around him, other veterans stared in disbelief. One nurse gasped. A therapist's pen dropped to the floor. It was the kind of silence you feel in your bones. Harry looked up, as if expecting laughter. But none came. His grin faltered. He cleared his throat, mumbled something about great creativity, and moved to the next painting. The atmosphere, once warm and proud, turned heavy and cold. You could taste the humiliation in the air. One veteran muttered under his breath. Another simply rolled out of the room. What should have been a day of honor turned into a moment of shame. And here's the thing. People tried to explain it away. Some said Harry was joking, that maybe he was nervous. Others said he misunderstood. But for those who were there, it didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt like mockery. A punch in the gut from the very man who built his image on supporting them. Let's pause here for a second. Imagine you've fought for your country. Lost friends. Lost sleep. You've spent years clawing your way out of trauma, learning to express yourself again, only to have someone who should know better, someone who wore the same uniform, laugh at your pain. Would you forgive that? This wasn't just any public figure. This was the prince who founded the Invictus Games, who told the world that mental wounds deserve the same respect as physical ones. The man who gave speeches about healing through connection. The same man who now stood in front of veterans who idolized him and called their trauma a bit dramatic. The betrayal hit harder because of who he was. And within hours, the whispers began. Someone in the audience had recorded it. A shaky clip on a phone. the laughter, the words, the stunned silence that followed. That clip would soon find its way online, setting off a firestorm that the royal family wasn't ready for. But before the world heard the tape, something else happened inside that care center. Something even more powerful. Lucas didn't say a word. He just turned his wheelchair around and left the room. Later that evening, staff found him in the art studio, staring at the same painting, tears rolling down his face. He whispered, "He doesn't get it." None of them do. Others gathered around him. Veterans who had once called Harry their hero began to question everything. Was this the same man who'd cried on stage during the Invictus Games? The same man who said his time in Afghanistan had given him empathy for those who struggled to rebuild their lives? Or had all of it, every speech, every headline, just been performance? Outside the center, no one knew what had happened yet. Inside, the air felt like betrayal. A nurse later told a journalist, "It wasn't the words, it was the tone. The laughter." You could see the veterans shrinking in their seats. By the end of the visit, the prince had shaken hands, posed for photos, and walked out smiling. But behind him, a room full of men and women who once admired him were left hollow. And when the first leak appeared online, a short text post on a veterans forum titled, "He is an Arse," the entire narrative of Prince Harry, the champion of soldiers, began to crack. See, that's the irony that makes this story so explosive. Harry built his brand on pain, his own and others. He told the world that trauma needed understanding. He said mental health was his calling. But that day in Toronto, when faced with real, unfiltered pain, he laughed. And that single laugh said more about who he truly is than any speech ever could. People began asking hard questions. If he could mock a PTSD painting in private, what does that say about his public empathy? If he can laugh at the scars of war, what else has been an act? It wasn't just about one moment. It was about what it revealed. Because the veterans weren't the only ones who noticed. Staff members at the center were reportedly stunned. One therapist said privately that she'd never seen the group so demoralized. It undid months of progress in a single moment, she said. These men and women trusted him. They believed he understood. Now they feel small again. The next morning, local reporters began to sniff around. Rumors spread quickly through the veteran community. Words like arrogant, disrespectful, and phony started popping up in online forums. And as the chatter grew louder, one question kept resurfacing. What really happened in that room? That's when the clip surfaced. Grainy, unsteady, but unmistakable. You can hear Harry's chuckle. You can hear the veteran's silence. And then, a faint voice in the background. Not funny, mate. The video spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares, headlines and whispers. And before long, the Royal Press Office was scrambling to respond. But damage control came too late. Inside Toronto's veterans community, the trust was gone. What was meant to be a visit of gratitude had turned into a scandal of cruelty. And yet, this wasn't the first time whispers of arrogance had followed Harry. Insiders would soon reveal similar stories, quiet moments of insensitivity swept under the royal rug. But this time it was caught, heard, felt. That's why this story matters now. Because it exposes a pattern, a truth hidden beneath years of royal charm and PR polish. The veteran who posted the "He is an Arse" message didn't just vent. He triggered a reckoning. Veterans from across Canada began to speak up, each with their own stories, their own disappointments, their own sense of betrayal. For many, this moment became symbolic. Not just of Harry's hypocrisy, but of how easily the powerful can forget the people they claim to represent. And now, the question hanging in the air isn't just about a laugh. It's about what that laugh revealed. Because when a prince mocks pain, the laughter doesn't stay in the room. It echoes through the walls, through the headlines, through every soldier who's ever fought to be heard. And for Harry, that echo may never fade. But the real story, the one that turns this quiet scandal into a roaring storm, was only beginning. Because what came after the laughter, what the other veterans did next, would expose the man behind the medals. And it would shake the image of Prince Harry, the hero, to its very core. It was a gray November morning in Toronto, the kind of morning that feels too quiet, as if the city itself is holding its breath. Outside the Veterans Care Center, the Canadian flag fluttered weakly against the wind. Inside, the staff was buzzing. Today wasn't an ordinary day. Today, royalty was visiting. For weeks, The center's residents had been preparing for it. The rooms had been cleaned twice over, the coffee machines replaced with silver urns, and every wheelchair had been lined neatly in the hall. There was excitement, yes, but also pride. This wasn't just about meeting a prince. It was about being seen, being heard, being understood by someone who'd once worn a uniform himself. "Prince Harry's coming," one veteran had said, smiling despite the tremor in his voice. Finally, someone who gets it. That was the sentiment echoing through the hallways that morning. After all, Harry wasn't like the other royals. He'd served in Afghanistan. He'd walked among the ranks. He'd seen fear up close. He'd built the Invictus Games, a global movement that gave wounded soldiers a new sense of purpose. To the veterans in Toronto, he wasn't a distant figure in a crown. He was one of them. Or so they thought. The art therapy program was the heart of the center. It wasn't about painting pretty landscapes or sunsets. It was about healing. Each canvas was a confession. Each color carried weight. The walls of the small gallery room were lined with these confessions. Black swirls of chaos, jagged lines cutting through red, faces half-formed, disappearing into shadow. You could walk through that room and feel the pain humming in the air. The veterans called it the silent exhibition. That's what Harry was coming to see. Inside the art room, Lucas adjusted the strap on his wheelchair and looked around at his fellow artists. His palms were damp. His painting sat in front of him, a violent blur of red and gray, streaked with white cracks that looked like lightning splitting the sky. He didn't name it because he couldn't. Naming it felt too final, too heavy. But everyone in the therapy group knew what it meant. It was his nightmare. His sleepless nights. His explosions that never stopped echoing. When the therapist told them Prince Harry would visit, Lucas had felt something stir, hope, maybe even pride. Harry had spoken publicly about his own mental health battles, about the trauma of losing his mother, about war. Lucas thought, maybe he'll understand. Maybe he'll look at this painting and just know. Down the hall, the staff were whispering instructions. "No politics," one nurse reminded. "Be polite, smile. He's here for you." As if they needed reminding. At precisely 11 o'clock, the black SUV convoy rolled up the driveway. Security fanned out quickly, earpieces flashing. Cameras were everywhere. Local news crews, royal correspondents, social media teams. The veterans, dressed in their best shirts and medals, straightened in their chairs as the door opened. Prince Harry stepped out, smiling, waving, looking every inch the royal soldier. He shook hands, clapped shoulders, joked with the media. For a moment, it felt real, like maybe the man behind the headlines was actually here for them. Inside the art room, the energy shifted. People began whispering. "He's here. He's really here." Then the doors opened, and he walked in. "Good morning, everyone," Harry said, his voice echoing in the small room. "It's wonderful to be here. I've heard so much about this program." His words were polished, practiced, the kind you'd expect from someone used to cameras. But the veterans didn't mind. They smiled anyway. They were grateful he was even there. He moved slowly around the room, looking at the paintings, nodding thoughtfully, murmuring things like, "Fantastic work," and "That's powerful." The veterans glowed under the attention. Then he reached Lucas. Lucas looked up. His hands trembled slightly as he gestured toward his canvas. "This one," he said softly. "It's what it feels like when you wake up at night and don't know where you are. It's what's inside." For a moment, Harry studied the painting. His brow furrowed. He tilted his head, lips twitching. And then, almost under his breath, he said the words that froze everyone in place. "Well," he chuckled, "that's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" The words slipped out so casually that for a second, no one reacted. But then came the laugh, short, sharp, dismissive. It hit like shrapnel. Lucas blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Around him, silence fell like a heavy curtain. The veterans stopped breathing. The nurses exchanged stunned looks. A therapist dropped her clipboard. Harry moved on, pretending nothing had happened. But the damage was done. You could feel the temperature in the room drop. What had been excitement now felt like shame. The veterans avoided each other's eyes. No one wanted to move, to draw attention. Lucas stared at his painting, his therapy, his truth, and saw it crumble under ridicule. Now, pause for a second and ask yourself this. What happens when the one person you thought would understand laughs at your pain? That's not just an insult. It's a crack in your trust. A nurse standing near the door later told reporters she saw tears in Lucas's eyes. He tried to hold it together, she said, but his hands were shaking. Harry continued through the room, offering polite comments, but the magic was gone. The veterans' faces had changed. Their smiles were gone. Their eyes were cold. After a few more minutes, the handlers announced that the prince was on a tight schedule. He shook a few more hands, thanked the staff, and left to the sound of polite applause that felt forced and hollow. When the doors closed behind him, the silence returned, but this time it was heavier, like grief. Lucas didn't speak. He just wheeled himself toward the hallway, eyes fixed straight ahead. A few veterans followed him, unsure what to say. One of them whispered, "Forget him, mate. He's not worth it." But it wasn't that simple. Because for veterans like Lucas, respect isn't just a word. It's a currency. It's how they measure their worth after losing everything else. And when someone who claims to be your ally, your advocate, laughs at your struggle, that currency shatters. Later that afternoon, the staff gathered for a debrief. Some were angry, others confused. One therapist defended Harry. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe it was British humor. But another replied quietly, "There's nothing funny about PTSD." That night, Lucas sat alone in the art studio. The lights were dim, the canvases casting long shadows across the floor. He stared at his painting, the same one that had taken months to finish, and whispered, "He doesn't get it." Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall. The next morning, word had already begun to spread. Not through the press, not yet, but through whispers. The veterans who'd been there told their families. The staff told their friends. Within days, Toronto's tight-knit veteran community was buzzing. Did you hear what he said? He laughed at it. At PTSD? At PTSD. It didn't take long before someone wrote about it online. Just 3 words. He is an arse. It was raw, it was angry, and it spread like wildfire. At first, no one believed it. Harry? The Invictus guy? No way. But then the details started matching up. The date, the center, the visit. And soon, everyone wanted to know what really happened in that room. Was it just a misunderstanding? Or had the prince revealed something the public wasn't supposed to see? That's the question that would soon ignite a storm. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When a royal enters a room, the cameras follow. But what the cameras miss is often what matters most. The fleeting expression, the careless tone, the moment when the mask slips. And for a brief second in Toronto, the mask slipped. One veteran later described it best. It wasn't just that he laughed. It was the way he looked at us. Like we were props in his story. That's what made it sting. The veterans weren't there for show. They were survivors trying to rebuild their lives, using art as the one language that didn't judge them. To have that language mocked by someone they trusted felt like being silenced all over again. By the end of that week, what had started as a quiet visit began turning into a scandal the palace didn't see coming. And when the first photo from that event hit social media, Harry smiling broadly while Lucas sat stone-faced beside his painting, people started connecting the dots. The image looked innocent to the uninformed eye, but those who knew the story saw something different. They saw the exact moment a hero fell from grace. Because behind that smile was a laugh. Behind that handshake was a crack. And what no one realized yet, not even Harry, was that the veterans weren't going to stay silent this time. They were tired of being used as photo opportunities. Tired of polite excuses. Tired of pretending that words like understanding and healing meant anything when the man saying them didn't mean a word. So they began to talk. Quietly at first, then louder. And soon, one of them would decide to go public. To tell the world what really happened. To say, on record, what everyone else was whispering behind closed doors. But before that explosion hit, the atmosphere inside that Toronto Care Center lingered like smoke. Heavy, suffocating, unforgettable. The veterans kept painting, but something had changed. Their art grew darker. Their sessions quieter. The laughter that once echoed down the hallways disappeared. Even the staff could feel it. He took something from them, one nurse said. He didn't mean to, maybe, but he did. And somewhere, in the middle of all that silence, Lucas's painting still hung on the wall, untouched, unacknowledged, misunderstood. The colors hadn't changed. The message hadn't changed. But the meaning had. Because now, it wasn't just a painting about PTSD. It was a painting about betrayal. It's strange, isn't it? How a painting can hold more truth than 1,000 words ever could. How one swirl of color can carry the weight of nightmares, memories, and the ache of something you can never quite name. That was Lucas's painting, the one the prince laughed at. To anyone passing by, it might have looked chaotic, even disturbing. Splashes of crimson, streaks of gray, a dark void swallowing the center. But for those who'd been to war, who'd seen the sun rise over destruction, that painting made perfect sense. It wasn't chaos, it was memory. It was pain trying to find shape. Lucas had painted it slowly, over months of therapy. Each session, he'd add something. A shadow here, a flare of red there. The therapist said it was progress, that the more he painted, the more he healed. But he didn't paint to heal. He painted because he had to. Because sometimes, the only way to silence the screams in your head is to give them a voice on canvas. When he first joined the art program, he didn't talk much. His file said PTSD, severe. The nurses knew the symptoms, the tremors, the flashbacks, the sleepless nights. But they didn't know the story behind them. Lucas didn't tell anyone that. He'd been a medic in Afghanistan. He'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. Kids burned, soldiers torn apart, lives ending in seconds. He used to tell his comrades, "I patched them up, but I can't patch myself." After coming home, everything changed. Loud noises made him flinch. Silence made him panic. He couldn't stand the smell of smoke or diesel. He couldn't walk past fireworks without his chest tightening like a vice. But worst of all, he couldn't talk about it. Art therapy became his language. His first painting was nothing but black, thick, uneven brushstrokes layered until the canvas looked like it was suffocating. The therapist told him it was okay, that darkness was part of the process. The next few paintings had hints of light, streaks of white and blue trying to break through. Progress. Then came this one, the one that broke him open. It didn't have a name because, as he once told the group, you can't name something you're still surviving. When word spread that Prince Harry would visit, Lucas didn't think much of it at first. He'd seen plenty of politicians and celebrities come through, all smiles, handshakes, and empty speeches. But Harry felt different. He was a soldier, a royal, sure, but one who'd seen combat, who'd flown helicopters under fire. Someone who'd said, more than once, that war had changed him. The veterans admired that. They saw him as one of them. The guy who broke away from the stiff upper-lip monarchy to speak openly about trauma, to talk about therapy, to create Invictus, where broken soldiers could feel whole again. So when Lucas heard that Harry would see his painting, something in him stirred. Pride, maybe even hope. He stayed up late the night before, adjusting tiny details on the canvas. He didn't sleep. He kept telling himself, he'll get it. He'll see what it means. He even wrote a note on the back of the frame. This is not pain. This is what healing looks like when it hurts. That morning, the room was alive with nervous energy. The veterans were dressed in their best, the staff rushing around with last-minute touches. Lucas's painting hung front and center. The therapist wanted it to be the emotional highlight. And it was, just not in the way they expected. When Harry entered, cameras flashing, Lucas felt his heart race. Not from anxiety, but anticipation. He wanted this moment. Not for fame, not for recognition, but for validation. He wanted someone, anyone, to look at his pain and say, I understand. Instead, he got laughter. And that laugh, that single careless sound, rewrote everything. When Harry chuckled and said, that's a bit dramatic, isn't it? It wasn't just a comment. It was a collapse. Because in that moment, all the walls Lucas had built to keep himself together cracked again. The art wasn't just art. It was a lifeline. And that lifeline had just been stepped on by a man wearing medals. To the others in the room, it felt like time stopped. The therapist who'd helped Lucas paint that piece froze mid-step. She later said she'd never seen such pain in someone's eyes. He didn't even react, she recalled. He just went completely still, like he turned to stone. When Harry walked away, Lucas didn't move for several minutes. Then, without a word, he turned and wheeled himself toward the door. He didn't look back. That night, he didn't join the others for dinner. He stayed in the art room, the lights dim, the smell of turpentine hanging in the air. The therapist found him hours later, sitting in front of the painting, staring. She asked if he wanted to talk. He didn't answer. He just said quietly, he doesn't get it. He never did. And that's when she realized, this wasn't just about one man laughing. It was about everything veterans go through after war. The invisibility, the misunderstanding, the way people romanticize service but shrink from its consequences. Lucas had painted that truth, and instead of being seen, he'd been mocked. Now, here's where it gets darker. A fellow veteran in the group, a man named Carl, was so furious that he recorded a voice note right after the incident. In it, you can hear the anger shaking his words. He came here talking about empathy, Carl says, but he looked at that painting like it was a joke. Like our trauma was art school nonsense. What kind of man does that? He didn't post it right away, but he sent it to a friend, a journalist, and that journalist would soon play a massive role in what came next. But before the story spread, something changed inside the center. The veterans grew quiet. Their therapy sessions became subdued. The energy that once filled the art room was gone. The therapists noticed. The smiles had faded. The laughter, the good kind, the healing kind, stopped. Because how do you tell someone to keep painting their truth when the world laughs at it? It wasn't long before staff members started whispering among themselves. "Do you think he meant it like that?" one asked. "He's supposed to be the mental health guy." Another shook her head. "He's still a royal. They don't get it. They never will." By the end of that week, Lucas decided he wouldn't paint anymore. When his therapist asked why, he said, "Because what's the point? They'll just laugh again." Those words broke her, and that's when she realized one careless moment had undone months of healing. You might think that's an exaggeration, but when you live with PTSD, every ounce of progress is earned inch by inch. A single act of invalidation can send you spiraling right back to the beginning. Harry didn't know that, or maybe he did and forgot, but ignorance doesn't erase damage. Meanwhile, the royal team moved on as if nothing had happened. The palace released a cheerful press note. The Duke of Sussex visited the Toronto Veterans Care Center today, celebrating art therapy and resilience among heroes. The photographs looked perfect, Harry smiling, veterans applauding, paintings in the background. But anyone who had been there knew the truth. Behind every flash of that camera was a silence too heavy to capture. Lucas saw one of those photos online later. Harry was standing right beside him, smiling widely, while Lucas stared at his own painting, expression flat, distant. It looked almost symbolic. One man performing for the world, the other silently enduring it. When he read the article headline, "Prince Harry inspires veterans with empathy and humor," something in him snapped. Humor. That's what they called it. He shut off his phone and didn't speak for 3 days. The staff noticed. The other veterans noticed. But no one knew what to do. How do you undo royal cruelty? How do you confront the untouchable? One of the nurses, a woman named Hannah, said later in an interview, "It wasn't the words. It was the betrayal. You could feel the room change. He didn't see them as people. He saw them as props for his image." That statement would echo months later, when the scandal finally exploded. But at that time, no one imagined it would reach that far. They thought the story would stay contained, a painful memory whispered among veterans and forgotten by everyone else. But pain like that doesn't stay quiet forever, especially when pride and power are involved. Lucas's painting, once meant as a symbol of healing, had now become a symbol of hypocrisy. Veterans began calling it the laugh. Some joked bitterly. At least it got a royal reaction. But behind the jokes was bitterness, the kind that simmers, waiting to erupt. And erupt it did, because not long after, that journalist friend of Carl's decided to dig deeper. He'd heard the rumor, a prince mocking PTSD. He wanted proof. He reached out to staff members, veterans, even family members of those who'd been there. Some refused to speak. Others hesitated. But one, just one, broke the silence. He confirmed the moment, described the laughter, quoted the words exactly. And once that quote hit print, it was over. The Duke of Sussex laughed at a PTSD painting, calling it a bit dramatic, according to a veteran present at the event. That single sentence cracked open the story. Within hours, it was trending on social media. Some defended Harry. He must have been misunderstood. Others were furious. How dare he? What a hypocrite. He built a brand on empathy. Meanwhile, inside the Toronto Veterans Care Center, Lucas stayed silent. He didn't want the attention. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted to be believed. But fate had other plans. Because when one journalist's report sparked outrage, another went digging. Then another. And another. Soon, multiple outlets were contacting the care center, demanding statements. The administrators were caught off guard. "We have no comment," they said. But behind the scenes, they were panicking. The therapists were being asked for quotes. The veterans were being hounded for interviews. And then, as if the story wasn't raw enough, someone leaked the audio. A faint chuckle. A voice saying, "That's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" The silence that followed was deafening. It was real, and the world finally heard what the veterans had lived. In that moment, Lucas's painting stopped being a private act of therapy. It became evidence, proof of something people had suspected for a long time. That the image of Prince Harry as a wounded healer was, perhaps, just that, an image. And when that truth began spreading, when veterans worldwide began sharing their own stories of disappointment, that's when the real reckoning began. But before that storm hit, before the headlines and statements, there was still one thing that mattered most, that painting. The masterpiece that started it all. Because buried beneath the noise, beneath the controversy, was a message that no one could erase. Pain deserves respect. And that day, in that small art room in Toronto, respect died. It's strange how quickly a sound can slice through silence. The kind of laugh that doesn't belong, that doesn't fit the weight of a moment. You know it when you hear it. That sharp, careless sound that makes the air shift, that makes every heart in the room freeze. That was the laugh that came out of Prince Harry's mouth that afternoon in Toronto. And once it escaped, there was no taking it back. Imagine it. A quiet art room, the faint smell of paint and coffee, the slow creak of a wheelchair on polished floors. Veterans sitting upright, nervous but proud, waiting for their moment to share what their art meant to them. The man they'd come to admire, the Duke of Sussex himself, stands just feet away, surrounded by aides and cameras, wearing that familiar half-smile that the tabloids always call charming. Then comes Lucas's turn, the decorated medic, the quiet one with steady eyes. He doesn't talk much, but everyone listens when he does. His painting, a swirl of gray and red, a storm of chaos and grief, isn't beautiful in the conventional sense. It's raw, loud, and unsettling. It feels alive. Harry tilts his head, studying it for a moment. The cameras zoom in, expecting a meaningful comment, something about trauma, about strength, about healing. After all, this was his brand. The Invictus Prince, the wounded healer. But instead, he laughs. "Well," he says with that amused smirk, "that's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" And just like that, everything stops. You can almost hear the heartbeat of the room falter. The laugh lingers, awkward, too loud, too bright against the weight of what it followed. It wasn't the friendly, empathetic chuckle people expected from him. It was the kind of laugh that came from disbelief, maybe even superiority. Lucas stares at him, lips slightly parted, as if trying to process what just happened. Around him, the other veterans shift uncomfortably. A few glance at each other, silently asking, "Did he really just say that?" A nurse standing near the door grips her clipboard so hard it bends. The therapist who'd spent months guiding these men through art therapy feels her stomach twist. Harry, oblivious, moves on, still smiling, still polite, maybe realizing he's lost the room, but not understanding why. That's the thing about arrogance. It doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes, it hides behind charm. But that charm cracked in Toronto. A few seconds after the laugh, a veteran named Carl muttered, "Not funny, mate." The words weren't loud, but they carried enough bite that Harry's aides heard them. One shot him a glare. Another quickly tried to change the subject. Harry looked back, eyes darting around the room as if searching for a reaction that would save him. But there was none. No polite laughter. No applause. Just silence. Thick, suffocating silence. It was over in seconds, but it changed everything. That moment, that laugh, burned itself into the memory of everyone there. For the veterans, it wasn't just about a joke gone wrong. It was about feeling exposed, dismissed, belittled. When you live with invisible wounds, all you want is to be seen. And in that instant, they weren't. Now, here's where it gets messy. Cameras were rolling, but not all of them. The official press team had been instructed to film light, uplifting segments only. Anything uncomfortable would be quietly deleted later, standard royal PR procedure. But among the crowd was someone else, a volunteer, a young woman who worked with the therapy program. She was filming for social media, capturing behind-the-scenes moments. Her footage was raw, unfiltered, and unapproved. And on that footage, you could hear the laugh. It wasn't long before that clip began making its way around. Not online yet, not public, but whispered from phone to phone among the staff. A nurse played it in the break room, shaking her head. "Listen," she said softly. He actually laughed. The others leaned in. And there it was, the sound that shouldn't exist. Some tried to defend him. Maybe it was nervous laughter. But others weren't having it. "No," said one. He meant it. You can hear it in his tone. By the end of the day, the mood inside the center had curdled. Harry's team, meanwhile, carried on as if nothing had happened. They left the building with smiles, gave interviews about connecting with veterans, and posed for photos outside. Harry even joked with reporters, saying, "These heroes are more inspiring than they'll ever know." Inspiration, that's what he called it. But back inside, no one was inspired. Lucas refused to leave his room. He ignored dinner. He ignored the evening therapy session. The other veterans sat in the lounge, talking quietly among themselves. Some were angry, some were hurt, but most were just disappointed. One of them said, "Guess he's only a soldier when it sells." That line spread quickly. Almost like an unspoken truth everyone was too polite to say out loud. And here's the irony. Harry had spent years building a reputation as the compassionate royal. The one who got it. The one who opened up about his trauma, his anxiety, his grief over Diana. The one who told the world that veterans needed understanding, not pity. Yet when faced with real, raw vulnerability, he laughed. Was it nerves? Arrogance? Indifference? No one knew, but everyone felt it. That laugh exposed a contradiction the public hadn't seen before. The man who preached empathy had revealed his distance from it. Later that evening, a staff member tried to call the Royal Communications Office. She wanted them to issue a private apology, even a brief message of acknowledgement. But the response she got was curt and dismissive. His Royal Highness meant no offense. Please do not circulate unverified information. Unverified information. That phrase enraged the veterans. To them, it wasn't just about one laugh anymore. It was about being gaslit. The next morning, the whispers started spreading online. A post appeared on a small veterans forum. Prince Harry laughed at a PTSD painting yesterday in Toronto. Called it dramatic. Whole room went silent. Disgusting. At first, it went unnoticed. Just a handful of comments. But one of them stood out. A user replied, "He is an arse." Always was. That comment, raw, unfiltered, emotional, would become the spark that lit the fire. Within hours, screenshots of it began circulating on Twitter and Facebook. By the afternoon, online veterans groups were ablaze. Some shared their own experiences of disappointment with Harry's performative empathy. Others defended him fiercely. "You don't know the context," they said. "Don't believe everything you read." But then, context arrived. The unofficial recording, the one captured by the volunteer's phone, was quietly uploaded to a private Facebook group. It was only 18 seconds long. The sound was muffled, but it was enough. You could hear Harry's voice, clearly amused, saying, "That's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" Then came the faint, awkward silence. Then Carl's voice, "Not funny, mate." No laughter followed. Just quiet. Someone downloaded that clip and sent it to a journalist at a Toronto-based online outlet. Within hours, the story went live under a brutal headline. Prince Harry's insensitive laugh leaves veterans stunned at Toronto Care Centre. It exploded. By nightfall, the clip had been viewed tens of thousands of times. People debated whether it was real, whether it was edited. Some said it was fake news. Others pointed out the matching details, the date, the event, the veterans' descriptions. The palace stayed silent. Silence, though, has a sound. And in this case, it sounded like guilt. Meanwhile, Harry's defenders went into overdrive. His PR allies claimed he'd been taken out of context. He was engaging with humor, not mocking anyone, one source insisted. But the veterans didn't buy it. They knew the difference between shared laughter and laughter at someone. One of the veterans from that day told a reporter anonymously, "If he'd laughed with us, it would have been fine. But he laughed at us. That's the part people don't get." As the story grew, so did the backlash. Editorials appeared overnight. Commentators questioned how someone so vocal about mental health could be so tone-deaf. Even supporters of the Invictus Games began expressing quiet disappointment. A headline from a UK tabloid summed it up bluntly: "The prince who mocked pain." Harry's image, the wounded son turned compassionate leader, began to unravel. But the part the world didn't know yet was how deeply that laugh had scarred the veterans. For Lucas and the others, it wasn't just embarrassment, it was re-traumatization. Their art, their therapy, had been turned into a spectacle. A few days later, Lucas told a therapist, "I thought he'd understand. Guess I was wrong," she said. "You were hoping for closure." He shook his head. "No, I was hoping for respect." That one line would appear in multiple articles later. Simple, devastating, true. As the controversy spread, the palace finally broke its silence, sort of. A spokesperson released a short statement saying, "His Royal Highness was deeply moved by the artwork he witnessed and meant no disrespect. Any claims otherwise are inaccurate." But by then, it was too late. The damage was already done, and the internet doesn't forgive easily. What had started as a small incident in a quiet room had turned into a full-blown scandal, not because of what was said, but because of what it revealed. That laugh, that careless, dismissive sound, had pulled the curtain back on the illusion. The illusion that fame equals empathy. That talking about trauma is the same as understanding it. That a title makes you human. For the veterans, it confirmed something they'd always feared, that the people who claimed to stand with them never truly stood for them. And as the days went by, more stories began surfacing. Other veterans from past events started sharing similar experiences, moments where Harry had seemed distracted, dismissive, even condescending. One former Invictus participant told a reporter, "He plays the part well, but when the cameras turn off, he switches off too." It was no longer an isolated incident. It was a pattern, and soon, that pattern would come back to haunt him, in ways he couldn't have imagined. Because buried within that 18-second clip was something no one had noticed yet. Something faint. Something that, when analyzed closely, would raise even more questions about what really happened that day. And when the media discovered it, when they amplified it to the world, this wouldn't just be a story about a laugh. It would become a story about who Prince Harry really is when no one's watching. It started with a whisper, the kind that slips through locked doors and spreads faster than truth ever could. In the beginning, it was just talk among the staff, nervous, guilty talk. A few phones passed around quietly in break rooms. That grainy clip of Prince Harry's laugh wasn't meant for the world to see. It was supposed to stay inside those walls. But pain has a way of demanding an audience. By the second day, it was already too late to contain. A young volunteer named Erica had been filming that afternoon. She wasn't part of the royal press team, just a local communications intern for the Veterans Care Center. Her job was simple: document the visit, capture smiling faces, and post a cheerful video for the center's social media page. But what she captured instead was something that would change everything. The video wasn't polished. It wobbled, the sound dipping in and out. But right in the middle, clear as day, was the sound of Prince Harry's chuckle, followed by the now infamous words, "That's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" And then, silence. Erica hadn't even realized what she caught until later that night. She was reviewing footage for the social post when she stopped mid-scroll. She played the clip again, then again. The laugh was unmistakable. The veterans' faces said everything: discomfort, confusion, hurt. She felt her stomach drop. "What have I just recorded?" she whispered. Her instinct was to delete it. She knew how strict royal visit rules were. The media agreement clearly stated, all footage must be pre-approved by Kensington Palace's communications team before release. Posting anything unapproved could get her fired, even sued. But something in her wouldn't let her delete it. She thought about Lucas, about the veterans who'd poured their trauma into those paintings, about the silence that followed that laugh. She couldn't shake it. By the next morning, word was already circulating through the center that someone had it on tape. The veterans were talking, the staff was panicking, and the administration was doing damage control. Erica was called into the director's office. "Did you record the moment?" they asked. Her throat tightened. I think so. Delete it." She hesitated. "Sir, maybe. Delete it. Now. That's an order." She nodded, pretending to comply. But she didn't. Because by then, it wasn't about protecting her job anymore. It was about protecting the truth. That same afternoon, she reached out to Carl, the outspoken veteran who'd already posted online about what happened. She showed him the clip in a quiet corner of the cafeteria. When he heard it, his jaw clenched. "There it is," he said. "That's the proof." He looked at her and said something she'd never forget. "If we don't share it, they'll bury it. They always do." That night, Erica sent the video to a journalist she trusted, someone who'd covered veteran stories for years. His name was Daniel Harper, a reporter for a small but respected Toronto-based outlet. He'd built his career exposing government mismanagement of veterans' care, so when he got the message from an unknown number with the words, "You need to see this," he didn't hesitate. When he clicked play, he felt the same chill Erica had felt. It wasn't just the words, it was the pause afterward. The weight in that silence. The visible hurt on the veterans' faces. He knew instantly what he had. The next morning, he called the care center for comment. They declined. The palace's media office sent back a generic response. No recollection of such an incident. That's when Harper knew he had to publish. At precisely 6:42 p.m. on a Thursday, his article went live with the headline. Exclusive, Prince Harry caught mocking PTSD painting during Toronto veterans visit. That's a bit dramatic, isn't it? Underneath, he embedded the short clip, only 18 seconds long. Within minutes, the article crashed his site. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. The man who built his entire reputation on advocating for mental health. Laughing at a veteran's depiction of PTSD, it was almost too ironic to be real. But the clip didn't lie. Comments poured in. "This is disgusting. He's supposed to get it." I defended him for years, not anymore. And perhaps the most viral one. He's an arse. Always has been. The hashtag Harry the Hypocrite began trending within hours. Meanwhile, the palace scrambled. Behind closed doors, their crisis team was on high alert. Emails flew back and forth between Kensington Palace and Toronto officials. One royal aide reportedly said, "We need to shut this down before it becomes another Invictus PR disaster." Too late. The footage had already spread across Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, everywhere. Memes appeared overnight. Clips of Harry giving speeches about understanding trauma were edited alongside his laugh. The contrast was brutal. One viral video showed him saying, "We must listen to those suffering," immediately followed by, "That's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" It hit millions of views in hours. The next day, British tabloids picked up the story. The Daily Mirror ran with, "Harry's laugh heard round the world." The Guardian was more restrained. Toronto veterans shocked by royal visit incident. But the damage wasn't limited to headlines. The veterans themselves were suddenly thrust into the spotlight. Reporters camped outside the center. News vans lined the street. The administration was forced to issue a statement confirming the visit but refusing to comment on private interactions. Inside, chaos reigned. Lucas hadn't left his room since the story broke. Carl was overwhelmed by interview requests. Some veterans felt vindicated. Others were terrified. "We didn't ask for this," one said. "We just wanted respect." The therapists were worried too. The scandal had reopened wounds they'd spent years trying to close. But now, the story had taken on a life of its own, and it was only getting louder. In London, royal commentators scrambled to defend Harry. Some claimed the video was taken out of context. Others argued he was using humor to lighten a tense moment. But the veterans' reactions spoke louder than any spin. A Canadian broadcast aired an interview with one of the attendees, his voice disguised, face blurred. "We were proud to show him what we'd created," the man said. "We thought he'd understand." But when he laughed, it felt like all the progress we'd made just vanished. Another veteran was more blunt. He looked right at us and laughed. "That's not nerves. That's arrogance." By now, the palace's denial looked hollow. Every news statement only fanned the flames. Their attempts to downplay it, "His Royal Highness meant no disrespect," sounded robotic. It didn't help that Harry was silent. For nearly a week, he said nothing publicly. No apology, no explanation. The silence felt like confirmation. Meanwhile, Daniel Harper, the journalist who broke the story, began digging deeper. He interviewed multiple witnesses, staff, nurses, and volunteers. The details were consistent. The setting, the words, the stunned reaction. But then he discovered something else. There was a longer version of the video. Erica had trimmed her original clip to protect identities, but she'd kept the full recording on her phone. It showed not just the laugh, but what happened immediately after. Harry's awkward chuckle fading into silence, followed by Lucas's soft voice saying, "It's not dramatic. It's real." That version hit harder. When Harper released the extended clip, it broke the internet. The veteran's calm dignity contrasted brutally with Harry's careless tone. The world heard the pain, the confusion, The weight of what PTSD really sounds like. Commentators called it the most tone-deaf moment in modern royal history. And for the first time, even some of Harry's supporters began to waver. One tweet summed up the shift. "I used to think he understood trauma. Now I think he just profits from it." Meanwhile, at the Veterans Care Center, life had turned upside down. Paparazzi outside, emails flooding in, invitations for interviews, offers for book deals. It was chaos. But inside Lucas's room, none of that mattered. He sat quietly, staring at his painting, the same one that had started it all. A nurse brought him breakfast. He didn't touch it. When she asked how he felt, he whispered, "Like I never should have painted it." The nurse squeezed his shoulder. "Don't say that." He looked up, eyes tired. "He made it ugly. Not me." Those words broke her. And that's the truth behind the leak. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about fame. It was about dignity. Because for years, veterans like Lucas had been told their pain mattered only when it looked good on a poster. The leak wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of survival. But that's not how the palace saw it. Reports soon surfaced that royal lawyers were reviewing the legality of the recording. A quiet threat, a warning to back off. But by then, the story had become too big to suppress. Too many eyes were watching. Too many hearts had already chosen sides. And just when the palace thought they could contain it, something unexpected happened. A second veteran came forward. He wasn't at the Toronto event, but he'd met Harry years earlier through Invictus. His words lit another match. "That wasn't the first time he laughed at us." The headlines exploded again. Now, this wasn't just about a single incident. It was about a pattern, a revelation of who Harry was behind closed doors. And as more stories began surfacing, the palace found itself fighting not just for Harry's reputation, but for the survival of the entire narrative they'd built around him. Because the leak didn't just expose a moment. It exposed the myth. And the myth was crumbling fast. But the veterans weren't done. Not yet. Because one of them, the one who'd started it all, was about to speak publicly for the first time. His name was Lucas. And when he finally told his story, he didn't hold back. He didn't want an apology. He wanted the truth. And when he spoke, his words would echo across the world, all the way to Buckingham Palace. But before that, something else happened. Something that proved this wasn't just a story about a careless laugh. Because deep inside the royal press office, a frantic email went out, marked urgent, confidential. And that email, once leaked, would make the world realize just how desperate the palace had become to keep the truth buried. No one knew it yet. But the storm that started in one quiet art room in Toronto was about to become a hurricane. You said, every scandal needs a voice. One person brave, or angry, enough to step forward and tell the world what really happened when everyone else stays silent. For weeks, the Toronto veterans tried to keep quiet. They didn't want to turn their therapy into headlines. They didn't want pity. But after the leak, after the palace's denials and the carefully crafted PR statements, something inside one man finally snapped. His name was Carl Jennings. 51 years old, ex-Royal Marines. Bronze Star. 20 years of service, 3 tours, and a lifetime of scars that no medal could ever mend. He wasn't supposed to be in that art session that day. He'd come in late, walking stiffly with his cane, wearing a faded bomber jacket that still smelled faintly of jet fuel. But when Harry laughed, he was there. He heard it. And unlike everyone else, he didn't flinch in silence. He muttered something under his breath that day, words that the camera caught faintly in the background. Not funny, mate. At the time, it was instinct. But those 3 words would end up defining everything that followed. Carl wasn't the kind of man who chased attention. He hated cameras, avoided interviews, and lived a quiet life in Toronto's East End with his old dog, Winston. But he also wasn't the kind of man who could stomach lies. And when he saw how the palace twisted the story, how they dismissed the veterans' pain as misunderstanding and exaggeration, he decided enough was enough. 3 weeks after the leak, Carl called Daniel Harper, the journalist who first broke the story. His voice was steady but edged with anger. "You still covering that hairy mess?" he asked. "Of course," Harper replied. "Why?" "I was there," Carl said. "And it's worse than what you've heard." That was all it took. Harper drove across town the next day with a recorder, a notebook, and a quiet sense that something big was about to break. Carl met him in a dim cafe near the waterfront. He wore the same bomber jacket from that day, his hands trembling slightly as he wrapped them around a cup of black coffee. "I don't want pity," he began. "But I can't sit here and watch them lie through their teeth." Harper leaned in. "Start from the beginning." And Carl did. He described the atmosphere that day in vivid detail. The anticipation, the pride, the way everyone had dressed their best. "We thought it mattered, that he was one of us. He'd served. We thought he'd get it." Then came the moment. When Lucas showed that painting, Carl said, you could feel the air shift. Everyone went quiet. That painting, it wasn't pretty, but it was real. You could feel it. And then Harry looked at it, smirked, and said those words. He took a slow breath, eyes narrowing. That laugh, it wasn't nervous. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was mockery. I've seen that look before. The one people get when they don't understand pain and they're uncomfortable with it. Instead of facing it, they joke. Harper scribbled furiously in his notebook. Then what happened, he asked. The room died, Carl said flatly. Lucas froze. Everyone froze. I couldn't take it. So I said, not funny, mate. He looked at me, blinked, and walked on like nothing happened. Carl shook his head, his voice rising. That's what broke me. No apology. No recognition. Just gone. Like we didn't exist. Harper let the silence hang between them for a moment. Then he asked, why come forward now? Carl leaned back, staring out the window. The winter light caught the scars along his hands. Because I'm tired of people saying we imagined it, he said. Tired of that palace spin. We've been silenced our whole damn lives. First by the military, now by a prince. That was the moment Harper knew he had something explosive. A first-hand witness, decorated, credible, unshakable. But Carl wasn't done. He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and slid it across the table. You'll want this, he said. What is it? Everything. The flash drive contained the full recording Erica had sent him privately weeks earlier, the one she'd never shown the press. It included moments before and after the infamous laugh, capturing the full emotional tone of the room. Harper listened to it later that night in his car, sitting in the dark parking lot outside the cafe. The audio was rough but powerful. You could hear Lucas's voice explaining his painting, trembling slightly as he spoke. You could hear Harry's laugh, the words, the silence, the faint scraping of a chair as someone shifted uncomfortably. And then Carl's voice. Not funny, mate. But there was more. After the silence, Harry could be heard muttering. Well, art's subjective, isn't it? That one sentence changed everything. It wasn't just a throwaway comment. It was the sound of dismissal, the tone of a man trying to justify his insensitivity instead of owning it. Harper released Carl's interview the next morning under the headline. He mocked us. Decorated veteran breaks silence on Prince Harry's PTSD laugh incident. Within hours, the story went viral. This time, it wasn't just tabloids. Major networks picked it up. BBC, CNN, CBC, all of them. Carl's gravelly voice, calm but furious, played on every news segment. We thought he was one of us, he said in the interview. Turns out, he's just another rich boy who doesn't understand what real pain looks like. That line hit like a grenade. Across social media, the response was explosive. Veterans from around the world began posting their own messages of support. Photos of Carl in uniform circulated alongside the hashtag #WeStandWithCarl. But with the praise came threats. The palace's lawyers contacted Harper's outlet within 24 hours, demanding the removal of the interview. They claimed defamation, citing unverified claims made by a distressed individual. Harper refused. His editor backed him up. The story stayed live. Behind the scenes, however, Carl began receiving anonymous phone calls. Some were supportive, others weren't. One night, his phone buzzed with a blocked number. He answered. A voice on the other end, calm and cold, said, You've made your point. Let it go. Carl didn't scare easily. You tell your prince, he said, that this isn't about him anymore. It's about truth. Then he hung up. That single line, it's about truth, would later appear in headlines across the world. As the days passed, more witnesses began to back Carl up. A nurse came forward anonymously, confirming that the atmosphere went dead after Harry's comment. Another veteran described how the art therapy sessions never felt the same after that visit. Suddenly, this wasn't just one man's word against royalty. It was testimony, corroboration. The palace's silence grew louder. Every hour they refused to address it, the public's trust eroded further. Even Harry's once sympathetic supporters began to shift uneasily. Talk shows debated it endlessly. Some tried to defend him. He's human. He makes mistakes. But others were ruthless. This isn't a mistake, one veteran-turned-analyst said on air. It's a revelation. You can't preach empathy and laugh at trauma in the